Hi, welcome to this new season of The Empowered Badass with your favorite aerial coach, Ophelia, aka me. This is another episode today where we are going to discuss a term that sounds quite scientific but is not that complicated. It is called proprioception and neuromuscular control. All right, so I've got my little cat here. She's very cute. So if you hear some purring throughout this podcast, this is what's happening. She's purring hard right now. She's on my lap. She's very cute. So why do I want to talk to you about proprioception and neuromuscular control is for several reasons that do make sense in aerial. We work, first of all, proprioception and neuromuscular control for balance and also for the aerial skills when we up in the air. So, what is proprioception? Proprioception is not such a fancy word. Proprioception is your internal GPS. The thing that work your balance without you using your vision. So, we have things like testing, for example, when you close your eyes and you have to come on one leg, it's going to make you feel like you are on a boat. I always say in yoga, we feel like we're on a boat or that we've had 10 shots of tequila. And very often proprioception is that once you start closing your eyes and you go and start lifting on one foot, your proprioception might not come quite so naturally, but the more you practice, you will start finding those little adjustments that will make you feel, oh, okay, I'm starting to get it. And I can understand now that my body requires this. When you close your eyes as well and you pay attention to this proprioception, you're going to start noticing how your foot and your entire body find a way to balance itself. I can't help it. She's looking at me very cute way. So when you find this balance, the more you practice the eyes closed and the more you find that balance, and the more you notice that training proprioception and neuromuscular control is actually quite essential as aerialist. So I call proprioception like a internal GPS, and very often what we think of is a way for you to find this sort of intuitive and natural instinct, especially when we work with and such coordinating elements in aerial. How many times have you found yourself always finding that you confuse your left foot, right hand, right arm, and you're upside down, and then the teacher is like, use your right hand to grab behind the hoop and use your left foot to hook the knee on, right? Or especially with silks as well, when you have to wrap around and think about all these intricacies of wrapping your foot around something, catching onto something else. That's proprioception as well, right? That's neuromuscular control. That's proprioception. So once you start feeling a bit easy in terms of flowing through and in terms of controlling the movement and finding a sequencing becomes easier in terms of coordination, that comes from proprioception. Obviously cognitive development, but proprioception and neuromuscular control. And just a reminder as well, as aerialist, mastering balance is not just about staying still, right? It's also fine tuning the adjustment and all the body alignment while you moving. So on and on, working your proprioception and your neuromuscular control, well, it will help everything be more fluid, more control, and more flowy. All right. So the more complex the move, the more obvious proprioception and neuromuscular control you're going to have. It's going to be demanding of you. So what proprioception helps you understand where your body is in the space, the neuromuscular control is the moment where you find the way to act on that information. Yes, and neuromuscular control is the brain's ability to communicate with your muscles and to coordinate the movement. So it's just making sure that the right muscle fire up and the coordination is seamless. So why neuromuscular control is critical for aerial performance? Obviously, you need a high level of neuromuscular control. You need strength, you need grace, and also if you start using other bits like a swivel and you start spinning, then you need this even more. I don't know if you've noticed, but when you start spinning, for example, in hoop, things get much, much harder, much faster. I don't know if you ever tried to spin. I don't know what level you're at, but spinning is a skill in itself. And I know I'm not the best at spinning. But if you are challenged spinning and you feel sick when you spin, it's probably because your proprioception hasn't quite adjusted. So this is also a thing with dancers, right? Ballet dancers, when we say they're pirouetting around and they're able to pirouette and then turn and not feel sick and not feel like dizzy. In spinning the hoop, the same kind of applies with the proprioception. It's also not only getting used to it, yes, because we have obviously the balance liquid in our body, in our inner ear. So we've got those balancing body in our inner ear, but we also have a way for us to rely on what is happening from inside rather than relying on what's happening outside. And I don't know if you ever learn to spin, but we always say do not look at what's happening in outside the hoop. So we never look at what is not moving, we look at what's moving, aka like parts of our body or the hoop. The moment you start looking outside and you look at people or you look at everything, you start feeling dizzy and you lose control. Yeah, so that's your proprioception. Proprioception is also the way of closing in and just really feeling yourself, by bringing this sort of awareness. And neuromuscular control is then being able to follow up on that and finding the stamina, the strength, and the grace to move while you are challenged by all these dynamic spins. And I will always remember when you do performances and people ask you, well, I saw you perform and you were excellent and I was trying to wave at you to see me. Very often you want people to think that you've seen them and you paid attention to the audience. But in fact, when you're actually on the hoop and when you are performing or when you're spinning in particular, it's very unlikely the person's going to pay attention to the audience, because otherwise they'll start feeling sick, and let alone with the nerves as well, you will not be able to perform. So very generally, I know I'm revealing that secret to people because I always give a smile, but I apologize very often when the audience comes. I'm not paying attention to the audience. I'm paying attention to what my body is doing. So proprioception is a little bit like that. Is like that. Even in class, you have to just pay attention to what you're doing. You're not paying attention to what other people are doing. You're paying attention to what your body is doing, and you have to try and learn. So a really good example, like yesterday, I've had a couple of beginners. So people who have come to 1, 2, 2, 3 classes before, and they both had very different approach. One of them clearly has been training for a while because that person had the strength, but another person on the other side wasn't particularly a gym goer, but has done a bit of dancing and was a bit more, had a different kind of awareness. So the person who was kind of very strong and at the gym was kind of rushing a bit too much through the moves and wasn't able to find that control, even though was very strong. That happens quite a few. That's happened with me a few times as a coach with the male first timers. So because the male body tends to have more upper body strength, there is an ease into getting into certain position, but at the same time, the misunderstanding of the control that's required in why have I forgotten that word? In executing, there is no control in executing the move. So like in the execution, however, the control is not there. So proprioception and neuromuscular control here kind of work together. So you can be very strong but have very little proprioception, and your neuromuscular control is not going to follow up, or it's not going to line up really well. Then this other person was quite good at understanding how to climb and how to do certain movement. However, there was very little coordination of understanding where to place themselves spatially and understanding the left and the right. So each person and each individual will have different way to build that proprioception. So your history of how you train, your history and how many classes you have done in your life, your history from your leisures and activities and hobbies previously will impact your level of proprioception. So obviously, the more you practice this movement, the stronger the communication becomes. And that's why I'm explaining as well with the analogy of a cable. So your charging cable, if you use a phone charger and you're going to plug in your phone charger, but the cable, the silicone that's wrapping around it, the plastic is kind of broken, and you start seeing the electrical wires, yes, so those copper wires. Your nervous system is exactly the same. You start with, you don't even have the copper wires, everything is just cut. And it's actually really fascinating. I've seen some videos where they show how neurotransmitters really push, and how neural pathways are made, neural pathways, and you see the nerves starting to touch each other and join. And this is what happens. You start having all these filaments of nervous system that connect with each other. And then once they connect to each other, they start linking a little bit stronger towards each other. And once they start linking more and more towards each other, there is something called a myelin sheath, which is a fatty tissue. That's a fatty tissue. That's why fat is important in your diet, because it helps wrap. That's the plastic that's wrapping around the cable. The myelin sheath, which is fat, is what wraps and seals all these neural pathways. So the more you squeeze on your bar, the more you think about what you're doing, the quicker your neural pathways are going to build. And I can't stress that enough, in a way that a lot of beginners always want to rush through this, but unfortunately, you cannot cheat and you cannot rush building neural pathways. You just got to put in the work. And you just got to really work on this self-awareness and mindfulness of movement. Sometimes you don't even need to go into the next hard movement. You just need to keep on building the strength and the proprioception and the neuromuscular control with the foundation, because it makes everything much easier in the future. Because every time you learn a new move, or you have to do a different kind of dynamic movement, you have to start all over again. So if you already start with a few neural pathways that are strong enough to hold certain foundational movement, the harder and the more advanced moves will obviously feel a bit easier when you try them for the first time. And even for me, as someone who's a bit more experienced, if I go and start a new move, it will take me a while. I think everybody's come across this when you watch a video on Instagram or on TikTok and you're like, I'm going to try that. And you want to try it and you realize, oh, wow, I have no effing idea what I'm doing. I don't know how I need to place my arm. I don't really know. All of a sudden, you watch a video and all of a sudden you go in the hoop and you're like, I completely forgot what that looked like, what that person did, and how I'm supposed to do it. That happens to all of us, right? Which is like, what the hell? Why does it look so easy from that person? What does that person make it look easy? And second, why am I unable to remember anything that I've just seen 2 seconds ago? So this is really translating on building proprioception and neuromuscular control. It's the coordination, understanding the sequencing of the movement, and being able to perform it with this sort of strength, grace, and control. So that's why also repetition is quite important in aerial arts, and that's why we very often do quite excessively condition and do the same warm-up and do the same conditioning exercises, because repetition is key for a lot of us as aerialists. All right. So proprioception and neuromuscular control, they're like two sides of the same coin, right? Proprioception, tell your brain where your body is, and the neuromuscular control, make sure the muscle acts accordingly and it acts well. So let's give an example. With the straddle invert, we are going to initiate the movement through the hips and the core and the shoulders, right? So you send the signal to your brain by squeezing the bar and by starting to kick your leg if you kick, or by starting to lifting your legs up, that the current position of your legs, and this sends the feedback. This is why, as a coach myself, I'm very adamant and I'm very pedantic about teaching people straddle invert really well, because very often a beginner will tend to throw themselves horizontally instead of understanding that we're trying to climb and we're trying to close up the body. So often a lot of beginners will actually stay very wide open. They will kick the legs forward. They will start pulling the chest up and puffing and arching the back, instead of actually pushing the hoop forward or pushing the hammock forward. If it's in a sling in aerial yoga, and really harnessing that core and lifting the legs upwards rather than kicking them forward and using excessive momentum. So this is explaining how the body relies on the feedback loops to make small adjustments, especially when you start learning how to do a move properly. And at the beginning, you won't necessarily perform it well. It's the coach's job to make sure that the coach teaches you the right technique to make sure that you know how to harness that neuromuscular control. Because at the beginning of every move, none of us really have effective proprioception. Even the most experienced people, when they learn something for the first time, we very often don't know what we're doing. So the person guiding you is meant to be explaining to you how muscularly and how the movement clicks in. And I don't know if you ever notice, sometimes everything feels really hard, and then all of a sudden you just one teeny tiny thing, and then the moves all of a sudden just goes very easy. So it's very important to have the right guidance as well to help you with that. So obviously everything gets a little bit harder when you start spinning. That is normal, because and combining different movement as well, it requires a lot of brain power. Yeah, so sequencing and starting to flow and do some combos. As a coach, when I teach, obviously I teach a combo mini flow, and then week in, week out, we start collating these combos together into one bigger flow. Even when I teach one combo, a beginner, I will tend to break it down in moves and say, just practice move 1, just practice move 2, just practice move 3, before you try to even do the 3 moves together, because sometimes your brain can feel excessively overwhelmed by all this information, and therefore you're not going to be able to move very well, and you're going to struggle and sometimes maybe fall and injure yourself. So it's important as well to understand the limitations of your own proprioception. Again, each of us are individually different, and it's important to stay self-aware. How far can you go? How far can you push yourself? How well do you understand the move? And obviously, it's good to challenge yourself, but know when you should be breaking down maybe the combo, and maybe practicing several times each move separately in order to master them a bit better before you start linking them up together. Yeah, so that's an important part of your brain work as well. It's not just the body, the brain does an extreme amount of work in teaching you how to combine and how to bring fluidity and flow in your movement. So, on that note, it's important for me to remind the beginners why understanding proprioception and neuromuscular control is crucial. So I've explained already now what neuromuscular, what all of this work and how they work together and how they make you a better aerialist the more you practice it, right? So I've broken it down in so I've broken it down as well with an example to explain to you how the body works to do a straddle invert, the communication, the spatial awareness. Every move has their own proprioception. So obviously, when you start aerial, those systems might not be naturally developed. I explained to you I had student A and student B yesterday in my classes. They were very different in their approach, and I had to approach also coaching them very differently too. Yes. So beginners often will struggle with the body awareness, and they might not immediately feel where their limbs are positioned or how to engage the right muscle during complex moves. And I have noticed that a lot of beginners always want to do, when we do mixed classes, which is what we do in the gym that I teach at, we don't really separate beginners, intermediate, advanced, more advanced levels. I tend to come across a bit of an issue with the fact that beginners want to try the more intermediate and advanced moves when they haven't developed those proprioceptive skills and neuromuscular control skills yet. And developing the skills is obviously an essential part of the aerial learning process. Everybody just gets a little bit impatient and want to learn really, really fast. However, as you progress, you do start to form this almost instinctive cognitive reflexes. So such as knowing how to adjust your body when you're in a challenging position, how to safely exit a pose, how to catch yourself when you're almost about to fall. This is quite important. Also, those reflexes, knowing when you get stuck in a position and you're about to, I'm going to hold with this hand and I'm going to slide my leg out. That is so important for your safety. If something slips, it doesn't go as planned. This is quite an important part of really teaching that proprioception. So very often as a coach, I try to teach the basic moves of how to exit from a top bar, how to exit this, and I always explain you should always be holding the hoop with one thing. People sometimes sit and hold the arms down when I'm like, you should be holding from the top. Those are small adjustments that are so important for your brain to repeat over and over and over in order to teach itself to be safe. And so when you move, you have a bit more control. So even like I said, student A that was very strong could have fallen so many times because didn't really know where to place the hands and the feet, and sometimes was pulling a little bit too hard and putting themselves into position that wasn't necessarily the safest. That happened with another student that came into another class of mine and just simply did an up and over and let go of the hands and thought we're going to stay into balance, and they actually let themselves slip out and slightly roll forward, but without holding the hands when they roll forward. So those things are so important when you begin. It's when we are trying to tell you to scale back, it's not in a condescending way as coaches. It's because we can see that you need a tiny bit more work and a bit more consistency in the way you move. The role of a coach is obviously to teach you, to make sure you have fun, to teach stuff and to teach moves and to coach you through the learning of the moves. But it's also our roles is also to make sure that you stay safe, you don't hurt yourself as much as possible. Accidents are inevitable. Yes, obviously, accidents are inevitable. But the job of a coach is obviously to limit them, because we take a huge responsibility when that happens. And I know I've spoken about it in another podcast, in another episode, but when stuff happens in our classes, there is the most stressful thing that happens to us as a coach, because if you hurt yourself and you can't come back to class for a while, there's nothing worse than that. If you're a beginner and you have a fall, there's obviously the trauma and the fear of trying to do some things like that again. And I've witnessed, it's not embarrassing, it's a shame, it's not something I want to admit, but I've witnessed falls and trips and letting go and things like that as a coach, where my student could have had such bad repercussion. I've not seen really awful accidents, but I've seen enough things where, like I was saying, even someone who overtrained and was very experienced in their practice, was very advanced in their practice, and still managed to have a fall during conditioning exercises, not even during the combo or learning the flow. During conditioning exercises, managed to let go of the hands and fall because they were too tired. Yes, so the proprioception and neuromuscular control sometimes can get out of whack if you are overtrained, if you are tired. That's not just valid for beginners as well. That's valid for the more advanced people that keep pushing over and over and over. Pushing over this boundary of yours and lacking the self-awareness of not resting or keep on pushing beyond is also quite detrimental for your own training, because eventually you can seriously hurt yourself and you can injure yourself, and there is nothing worse than injuring yourself and getting through the trauma of a fall. Falling probably is horrible, and not only that, but also all the recovery thing, how long it takes you to come back, and are you going to be scared to try again? But I've had some students that came back and that just thrived after a fall. I was really impressed. Some people fell, didn't hurt themselves. Some people fell and did hurt themselves. And I think the most common thing that I would say results from a fall in aerial would be whiplash in the neck. And that's never nice. So personally, from experience as a coach, of someone who has been teaching for almost 10 years now, continually, I will say you do have to be careful with ensuring that you stay safe. On that note, I know this episode might be published much later than the news that we've had, but last week an aerial hoop artist from Cirque du Soleil actually had a fall. She survived the fall, which is quite miraculous in itself. But the person, that poor artist, kind of fell really badly onto her front. She was performing an intricate dynamic sequence. She has a really very bendy body, and a lot of us follow her on Instagram actually. And she shows a lot of her rehearsals, so we knew what kind of sequence she was doing. And it was a sequence when there was, for those who know, a Russian split is when you are standing on the one leg in the bottom part of the hoop and your leg comes through. And she was doing it in a contortionist way where the leg was up, held by the black strap. We call this a strap. I think some other people have another name for this, but also holding herself up on the hoop and arching the back. And she changed the grip of coming, moved to nesting, and the grip didn't come at that part, and the grip went, and she fell off. So even the more experts and the biggest athletes can have really terrible falls, and I feel really sad. I feel really sorry. I just want to send my words of encouragement to this artist, because I've had a lot of surgeries in my earlier years, not from a fall, that was corrective surgeries, but I know how difficult it is when you go through such long recoveries. And this accident has left her needing a lot of surgeries and a lot of long recovery roads. So I feel really sorry for her, because someone that young and that talented to have an accident like this is quite horrific. And I really want to say, as someone who has seen new students and advanced students also fall, it's very important to stay safe. And when an instructor tells you not to try this move, it's never to annoy you, or it's never in a condensing way. It's never in a condescending way. It is as a way to protect you from hurting yourself very often. Remember that your instructors are overseeing not just you, they're overseeing other people. We don't have multiple pairs of eyes, and we can't keep an eye on everybody. And we have to trust that you have the self-awareness to know when something is not safe enough for you. If you don't have anyone to spot you or help you go through the moves that knows how to do it, such as someone who's actually performed the move. And it's really important to respect your instructors, because they are in charge of you, the whole responsibility if an accident happens to you, and it's their own public liability insurance on the line, and it's their jobs on the lines when something happens to you. So I want to really remind you of how important and how respectful it is to just also be self-aware when you're moving, when you do an aerial class. So now, I know that's a bit of a Debbie Downer moment, but it's very, very important for me. I think that's most important from how we witnessed quite a few things, but also from what happened last week. I think seeing this poor young artist fall is just a very strong reminder of how dangerous it is, and how things like proprioception, neuromuscular control are important to develop and harness and hone and master, but also to rest. So resting that, to make sure that you rest your nervous system, is also quite important. All right, so training proprioception and neuromuscular control outside aerial classes. Yes, you can do that for yourself. It's not just something that happens overnight, remember. But if you want to keep on working that even outside the classes, I highly recommend it. If you know, I'm a big supporter of training strength and training and working out outside your aerial classes, because it will speed up your progress, it will speed up your performance, and it will just help in general with your stamina. So with proprioception, when you do a workout as well, I tend to recommend unilateral exercises, left and right, where you split. Yeah, so left leg, right leg, left arm, right arm. Some coordination things, such as moving one hand, moving one arm, moving one hand, moving one arm. You see, I can't even talk. Moving one hand, moving one leg, things that require sort of coordination. So things such as you can do leg balances drill, like single leg deadlift, you can do lunges, balance boards and Bossu balls, and things that destabilize a little bit your movement as well. You can do things like plyometric jumps and things that will challenge your balance, things that like dancing as well, to challenge your balance. Obviously, with the core strength and control, you can do things like planks with the leg lifts. If you are already on my YouTube channel, or if you have even tried to do one of my programs, such as the aerialist starter toolkit, you will see that I integrate a lot of plank with leg lift, dead bugs, and things that will require an amount of coordination where your core will be challenged on all fronts. And also, don't forget that even joint mobility work, like hip circle, shoulder circle, and making sure that you work with flexibility and your end range conditioning, which you can also visit in other podcast episode and in other videos. I explain what end range conditioning is in your flexibility training. That will also help improve how much of a load you put at your end range and how much more control you can have over the more stretchy pose, for example, that you can have in aerial. All right, so when you apply proprioception to complex aerial move, when you start progressing and you start noticing that the more complex move challenge proprioception in different ways, right? Whether you're transitioning from a static pose to static apparatus to spin, or if you move from a straddle to split, mechanisms like this will help your body adapt to the demand of the dynamic nature of aerial arts, right? So first of all, if you take as an example balancing during spins, if you learn how to do things like Russian splits, so it's quite important to understand first the concepts of balancing and Russian split on a static apparatus before you start moving and start spinning, because when you start spinning, you add a different kind of dynamic force as well, and your body has to understand how fast you're moving, which direction you're moving, and while also neuromuscular control allows you to obviously engage the correct muscle to stabilize. So a static movement with on one leg or that requires balance will feel very different when the hoop is moving in one way and even in another way, because you move in one direction and then the other direction. So that's why also we tend to kind of promote working both sides and try the moves on both sides. We all know we are very not good at this, isn't it? And me included. I do the same mistake. But that's why I work out at the gym, to try and rebalance my left and my right side. So that's why I recommend you to do the same as well. If you are too lazy to work both sides when you do an aerial class, then rebalance your body at the gym. Now, the common mistakes that I see in people with the proprioception issues is, first of all, we rely too much on the vision. And the most obvious element of relying too much on the vision is to spin and start feeling sick very quickly. That means you're relying too much on the vision. And again, I would see that myself when I'm, for example, a bit more tired. I will rely too much on the vision as well, and my spins are not going to feel very good. So I've got some days without, and on the days without, I notice that my proprioception is not as good as well. And also neglecting your core engagement. You probably need a bit of a stronger core. You maybe need to work a little bit more on understanding the holistic communication between the top and the bottom part of your body, and how the core really synergizes everything in a more balanced way. So you might have strong abs in a certain area, but you might not be engaging the shoulder blades properly, or your pelvic floor might not be kicking in really well, or your hip flexors might not be strong enough as well. So all of this holistically are important with each other in order to find this great balance and this great neuromuscular control in aerial arts. Right, I think we've covered everything. So that was a bit of a longer episode. I think we covered quite a lot today, but I think it was just really important that we discuss on these principles, because those are subjects that are part of aerial training, but the coach don't always have the chance to explain it in depth during a class. So I hope that this was really helpful for you. So if you found this really interesting and really helpful for aerial training, first of all, share it far and wide to other aerialists like you that need to learn a bit more about this. And second of all, make sure that you comment as well, and that you let me know what you found about this episode. If you want to hear more about this sort of more scientific approach to aerial training, and also do let me know, because I just really enjoy knowing who actually listens or watches this. And building up that community for me is actually quite important. And lastly, if you were interested in checking out my app, the Aerial Performance Lab, which has the the Aerialist Starter Toolkit and other programs for strength and flexibility and conditioning for aerialists, so you can train a little bit more sustainably. That includes some rehab program and maybe some proprioception exercises that I will create for you. It's a membership system and my platform, and you have access to multiple programs that you can start, and those are all catered to train more sustainably outside aerial classes. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode again of The Empowered Badass, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.